My name is Ken Brotherston. I'm the Chief Executive of TALiNT Partners.
Ken, thanks so much for making time join us on the Avi podcast. Before we dive in and talk about all the great things you guys are building with your current organization, give us a thumbnail version of your career prior to that.
So thumbnails are hard when you've been around for as long as I have, but very briefly, I was an accountant back in the 80s with CBS Records. I was a European financial analyst there. And then I decided to move into recruiting. I ended up on the board of a company called Robert Walters. And from there, I went back into corporate life as HR Director for part of Fidelity, the US fund manager, and had a few years with them before moving back into recruiting with Korn, Ferry, the world's largest executive search firm. And I spent a number of years there, ended up on their global operating committee. So one of the sort of half a dozen managers that ran the firm worldwide. And then in the 2000s, early 2000s, I decided to do a private equity gig, and I became chairman of a business called Morgan McKinley. And we sort of bought that and sold it 3 years later quite successfully. And for the sort of 10 years or so after that, I was a mix of investor, non-exec, sometimes chairman of a variety of different businesses, including a film casting business where I actually have a walk-on part in the James Bond film Skyfall, would you believe? And it is the definition of blink and you miss it. I think I'm on screen with Javier Bardem for about 0.5 seconds, but that was one particular thing. And then 5 years ago, I was involved with a technology business that had a sort of sideline in events, and I really enjoyed that. So we came to an agreement, and I bought the events business and created TALiNT Partners. And we've been on a mission for the last 4 years or so to create a business intelligence company that delivers meaningful insight across the whole talent ecosystem.
Very diverse background, from accounting to recruiting to appearance in the James Bond movie to what you guys are currently building. I would have to make a note of that and probably check it out and see you in that cameo appearance. So definitely looking forward to that. Ken, tell us a little bit more about your current company, TALiNT Partners, and what is the problem that you guys are solving?
Very simply, we help employers find and keep the people they need. So that's our kind of primary purpose, if you like. So as I mentioned, we operate across the talent ecosystem, and what that means in straightforward language is we work with employers around the world, helping them identify and solve some of their talent challenges. And then we work with a group of vendors who are typically either large staffing firms, large talent solution providers, or a whole range of talent technology businesses to help them engage with employers and deliver their solutions in an effective way. And we do that in, I would say, three main ways: through our awards. So the Tiara brand for awards in the talent ecosystem has become the largest series of awards campaigns in the world, actually, servicing employers, staffing solutions, and technology firms. And that delivers amazing insight because we see, the very best that talent acquisition and recruiting has to offer. We deliver a whole range of peer-to-peer networking sessions in the form typically either of small conferences or workshops and lunches and dinners. And then we have a content platform where we curate a lot of content and we deliver that to a wider audience.
Well, that's outstanding. Definitely, I personally see a lot of need for a service as such, especially on the insights and industry publications on talent acquisition in particular, because it's been such a hot topic in the last couple of years as we entered, and through the pandemic, the war for talent, the war on retention, it's been real out there. So further on that topic, what are the different trends in talent acquisition that you mostly excited about, especially these days and going into 2022?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we say that the issue of talent acquisition has gone from being a kind of trade press it's gone from the trade press to the business pages to the front pages, and if you look at literally the headlines in the news as we hopefully come out of the pandemic soon, it's very much about how we work, how we work in different ways, how organizations find access to talent. So it's always been an important issue, and it's never been more important, and it's a really interesting and exciting time to be part of that discussion. For me, as we look forward, I think there are a couple of what I'd call kind of big trends, and these were kind of pre-pandemic trends. So one is around hiring for skills, not experience. And that's a huge shift in how organizations find people. And it's a huge shift in how suppliers to those organizations deliver talent. I think the notion of total talent management, so organizations looking at all of the resources that they have available in helping them meet their talent needs, is a really kind of complex and interesting issue. And I think underpinning all of that are the possibilities of technology and specifically AI. We could get into a whole discussion about the definition of AI, but nevertheless, it's clear that there are some really exciting innovations driven by technology that are going to be making a big impact on the world of talent for years to come.
Right, absolutely, and that's such an interesting space that we could probably spend the rest of the podcast talking about
just
this.
On that,
yeah, on that particular area, because it's we've seen the different cycles in the industry going from just the initial war for talent, and now on the retention side for organizations, especially those that operate on a global capacity, to retain the top talents with all the competition that's increasing out there. It's definitely a challenge. So to double click on that, for perhaps any of your client companies or just maybe your partners that are succeeding in the space of retaining the top talent better than the other companies, what are the different strategies that you observe that they have implemented that really help them create and cultivate that environment of retention?
So, I think it's a very important point, because you can't fix attraction until you've fixed attrition, right? So if you're trying to bring people in the front door, but you've got more people leaving through the back door, that's never going to be a successful, strategy. So I think there's a few important, points here. The first is to be really clear about what you need, and this definition of top talent is a phrase that's can be interpreted in lots of different ways. You need to be clear as an organization when you need to hire the best people as opposed to people who are just good enough. And that doesn't mean you're hiring bad people, but to be, I don't know, if you look at the shortages, the acute shortages recently, they've been in things like warehouse staff, delivery drivers, where the shortage of those people have caused really acute issues in supply chains and organizations. So you don't need someone to be the best truck driver in the world. You just need them to be, competent enough to do the job. If you need someone to create, new products and services and really drive innovation and do that at a leadership level, then you may well be looking for the very best talent that you can find. So I think it's important to be clear about when you really need top talent and when you really need talent that's good enough. The other thing I would say in terms of a retention strategy is to drive decision making to the lowest level. And to make sure that anyone you're bringing into your organization has that real sense of empowerment, to be able to do the job that they need to do. And I think one of the things that a lot of organizations have found in the pandemic is, getting 80% of the way there is good enough, and in a lot of big corporates, they would have got to 80% really quickly and then spent a year trying to get to 99.5%, or 2 years, and then they never get there, So whereas I think in the pandemic, because some things had to happen so quickly, organizations have realized that actually getting to 80%, and then saying go is good enough. And I hope that's obviously, if you're designing a nuclear power plant, 80% isn't good enough, but in a lot of other organizations, just getting most of the way there enables you to actually get all the way there. And I think that would be a good learning for organizations to have taken out of the pandemic.
Right, absolutely. And when we talk about organizational agility and flexibility to be able to scale up or down in certain situations, utilizing contingent workforce, freelance and gig opportunities there are immense. What are some of the insights that you can share that you see organizations implement when it comes to utilizing the different types of workforce out there in order to compete in the modern environment?
Yeah, there are a few things that you clearly see working well with organizations that have thought about this carefully. A more holistic approach. I mentioned the total talent management approach. So a more holistic approach to your workforce, and looking at contingent workers and permanent workers and increasingly treating them the same. So, for example, giving training and development opportunities to your contingent workforce as well as your permanent workforce. A more flexible approach to how people work is absolutely crucial. Not every role can be remote. Some are in the middle and others can be remote, but being clear about how that works and communicating that fairly is important. A focus on development is incredibly important. I think people are much more focused about their career development now and the development of their own skills than they ever have been. And by the way, I don't just mean young people. I mean people in mid-careers and even people that coming towards the end of their careers. They can still have 5 or 10 years left, and they want to be able to stay relevant and employable. Again, another area that we could do a whole podcast on is around diversity and inclusion. But I think, to answer your question, environments that are more inclusive are more successful. So I think organizations learning how to do that. I think understanding that treating your workforce, often you might have 5, increasingly organizations have 5 generations in the workforce. And trying to segment them based on their age is wrong. And it's way too simplistic. It's just too simplistic. And it's a very common refrain that I hear saying, well, millennials do this and Gen Z do that and baby boomers, in the context of workplaces, that is just way too simplistic. And if you're not thinking about that more carefully, you'll end up tripping yourself up. And I think the final point is, when it comes to compensation, it's really thinking about it as an overall reward package. So not just, clearly pay is important and all of those things are important, but actually thinking about compensation much more holistically and being able to flex as people move through different stages of their careers.
It's an interesting point you make, especially around compensation, and I've seen organizations get very creative when it comes to the benefits package and other opportunities to reward the workforce or the consultants or even the full-time employees that they employ at their organizations. But some stick to the basics, some stick to the principles. It works for different environments. There's no right or wrong. Just overall, to double click on that perspective from compensation standpoint, what are your thoughts on that? How can organizations really compete, especially when certain types of organizations do require workers to be on site, to be their physical locations, while others have the luxury, capacity to employ virtual workforce on a global scale? How do you compete in that? What are the thoughts, especially when we coming out of, just at least getting flavors of coming out of pandemic, that some organizations really push for that, at least some flexible work environment?
Yeah, and I can think of an example of there was a software firm in Silicon Valley that they said, we pay our developers $150,000 a year. I don't care whether they're in the Bay Area or in Vietnam. That's what we're going to pay them. And there's a very pure economic argument around that. But if you're a larger organization, that argument just doesn't work. That approach doesn't work. You have to recognize that different jurisdictions, different countries have different, different rates. So it's a really, really complicated issue. And anyone that thinks there's a one-size-fits-all approach to this is just looking at it too simplistically. Likewise, people that work from home on a permanent basis, they might be saving a lot of travel costs, but they're giving more time. So how's the trade-off there? If someone is coming into the office more, they're engaging with perhaps younger people and helping them with their training. Should they be more rewarded for that? I mean, it's a really complicated kind of problem to solve, and it's not something that is going to be done in the next few months. This is going to take a few years, I think, to really play out into those models that, a better understanding of those models that really work well. I think the key, and where we see it working well, is where organizations have honest conversations with their employees and recognize that there isn't a perfect solution for everyone. And it comes down again to this notion of trying to be fair, trying to listen to your employees and saying, we understand you've got a need, but we have a business need, we have an organizational need, and we're trying to find the best fit, and I think organizations that have, honest conversations about that are doing better in being able to either attract or, more importantly, retain the talent that they have.
Absolutely. And there's so many variables to this as well, that there's no such thing as a specific formula that could really be applied to particular situations. So I definitely value some of your thoughts on a very complex topic as such, and especially compensation for, the gig contingent worker and the full-time employees. That's an interesting space. Ken, you do a lot of research, you do a lot of publications and writing on this particular space. But what are the different sources that you consume on a daily basis that help you stay educated, or ahead of the curve, especially everything that goes on in your industry?
So you'd expect me to say that our own content, and in particular TALiNT International magazine, I encourage you all to have a read, is a great source of anyone looking for information on this. And actually, I joke a little bit, but we do try and curate, a lot of different voices and a lot of different opinions to help, anyone involved in the talent ecosystem, really understand the trends and challenges right now. I do look at kind of blogs and content from real market experts, and I'm particularly careful of people who present themselves as experts when they're just trying to sell you something. Okay, so I think there's I think it was a US president that said it, be careful of accepting the opinion of someone whose salary depends on you accepting it, right? So and there's an awful lot of content out there that is dressed up as insight, but actually it's a sales pitch. So it's important for people to kind of just bear that in mind. But having said that, there's some great stuff. But for me, the truly best source comes from the peer-to-peer interactions that we have. The discussions with either HR and talent acquisition leaders sharing their challenges and their problems, and then talking to a lot of the vendors who are trying to solve those problems, and doing that in a kind of small groups in a confidential way is just an absolutely amazing way of getting insight. And then the final thing is our awards entries. As I said at the top of this podcast, we get literally hundreds and hundreds of award entries, and I read them all. And I used to think it was a chore, but actually it's not. It's a privilege, because you truly see the best work that's going on, in the sector, and some amazing work that employers are doing, on their own. Some of the work that they're doing with partners, across that whole spectrum of activities, and that's a fantastic way for us to keep up to date with what's going on.
Right, absolutely. And there's, with so much information overload out there, I'm always fascinated with different strategies, how selective you are in terms of where you let your mind be exposed to. It's an ever changing struggle that we all deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of the career advice or series of advice that you had received early on in your career that you continuously refer back to and pay it forward for those whom you mentor yourself, what are some of the words of wisdom that you can share?
So I think there's two sides to this. So there's one as an employer, and when you're trying to attract talent, and I would say three things: don't make it easy. Okay, when you're trying to attract top talent, don't make it easy. Make it clear what the process is, but not easy. Top talent wants to be challenged. It truly wants to think that if it's if it's achieved a job, it's been hard to achieve. So that's, I think, a mistake a lot of organizations can fall into. But having said that, you need to make the process clear, and you need to be honest about the downsides of either your organization or the job itself, because they're going to come up at some point anyway. So you might as well get them dealt with up front. In terms of as a candidate, one of the questions, my favorite interview question is to ask a candidate when they make a statement, is to say, why is that important to you? And to keep digging, to ask that question 3 or 4 times to really get to the essence of why whatever it is they want, and it might be money, it might be progression, it might be a leadership role, and you say, well, why is that important to you? And keep asking until you get to the real essence of that. So as a candidate, you should know why what you're trying to do is important to you, and really ask yourself that question, because you may be surprised once you get into that and really think about it, what the answer is.
Right, absolutely. Those are definitely very, very powerful words of wisdom. So thank you for sharing that. Ken, in terms of, I see a very rich library on your background. As far as the book that you currently read, you're currently reading, or your favorite book that you always recommend to others, share with us those.
So I've got two. So one that I'm reading at the moment, and it's a book by someone called Bobby Duffy, and it's called Generations. And for anyone involved in hiring different generations, I thoroughly recommend it, because it debunks a lot of the myths around what different generations want, and it helps to explain how we kind of intersect in lots and lots of different ways, people of different ages. So I would encourage anyone to read that, because I found it incredibly useful. My favorite business book was actually recommended to me by a private equity guy about 25 years ago, and it's How to Win Friends and Influence People, written by Dale Carnegie, I think in 1936. And the simple lesson there is to get what you want, talk about what the other person wants, right? And it is such a simple but powerful lesson. And it still surprises me how few people actually, bear that lesson in mind when they're trying to get something that they want from someone else. So that would be my favorite or most recommended business book.
Well, you definitely can't go wrong with those recommendations, Ken. I really appreciate you sharing that. And just like with all the guests on the podcast, what I love to do is a follow-up recording in about a year, where we actually revisit the conversation from a year ago to now, and see if everything we've discussed still makes sense, still applies. So I'm definitely looking forward to doing that with you as well, Ken. Thank you so much for your time.
It'd be my pleasure. Thank you.